Children of those who committed genocide, their fathers, police or military officers during the dictatorship in Argentina, therefore responsible for the disappearance of up to, according to human rights groups, 30,000 people. Many since accused, sometimes convicted, of crimes against humanity. The military junta, which called itself the National Reorganization Process, seized power in a coup as the Perón dynasty came to an end in 1976. They launched a so-called dirty war. Thousands of people killed, mostly just for being suspected left-wing sympathizers. People were held in concentration camps, stripped, tortured, drugged, and then disposed of. Others even murdered and their bodies thrown out of planes into the delta north of Buenos Aires.
She was kidnapped on December the 8th, 1977, after being arrested in a church. She was on one of the death flights a few days later, on the 14th. She and the others were thrown into the sea from this plane.
The junta fell in 1983 after its disastrous occupation of the Falkland Islands. It left it reeling, and it restored democracy in 1983. Since then, there has been some justice. In all, more than 1,000 military officers tried for human rights abuses. After several decades of silence, though, children have decided to make their voices heard, renouncing their fathers, others even publicly revealing their own families' dirty secrets. Well, Eleanor Vanel with Anke Uhle revisit the children of Argentina's military dictatorship for France 24.
Here at this memorial site near the river, I can't help but think about what happened. I feel sick to my stomach. It makes me nauseous.
At Memory Park in Buenos Aires, on these concrete walls, are the names of thousands of Argentinians who disappeared during the military dictatorship. On so-called death flights at the end of the 1970s, political opponents were drugged and thrown from airplanes into the bay outside the capital, where they met a watery grave.
It happened when I was 4 to 10 years old, so I was very young. Information was hard to come by. That's why these spaces help to reconstruct this history, which is so sinister, so tragic.
Most of the bodies were never found. Human rights groups estimate around 30,000 people disappeared. Argentina's dark past still causes pain and suffering for the families and descendants of victims, but also for those on the other side, those whose families were on the wrong side of history.
I'm the daughter of one of the pilots of the death flights. Since I learned what my father did, I consider myself his ex-daughter because I'll no longer allow him to be my father.
Florencia Lancé grew up in an affluent neighborhood in the capital, unaware of the violence taking place at the time. Each year, her father would throw her a birthday party at the military camp where he worked.
The space was set up for a children's party with balloons. Everything you'd normally see at a party. Except the place we were celebrating the birthday at was a concentration camp, just a few meters from the runway where the death flights took off.
Everything changed when she turned 11, when a friend told her he wasn't coming to her birthday party.
He told me he couldn't make it because in the place where I had my birthday parties, people were being murdered. That was a huge shock for me. I never got over it. Right after, I asked my father to explain, and he didn't deny it. He said he was a military officer trained to serve the dictatorship.
Florencia was just a child. It took her years to grasp the gravity of her father's confession. On her 18th birthday, she cut off contact with him. The next time she had news of her father was 25 years later, during his trial, when he was sentenced to life in prison.
It's just impossible for me to accept what he did, to accept that this is the same person I loved, who I played with, laughed with. to comprehend that right after that same night, when he left home, he flew a plane that would throw people to their deaths in the sea or the river. It's impossible for me to forgive him.
Florencia is speaking out now in order to help her country come to terms with its past. In Argentina, she's not the only child of the regime who wants to make her voice heard. Analia Kalinek started an organization that brings together the families of war criminals, who, like herself, have decided to cut ties with their family legacy.
We're organizing ourselves precisely in order to defy this tradition. These orders that have always placed us in the public consciousness in the same ideological line as our criminal fathers.
At the Buenos Aires Book Festival, Analia is reading a children's book written by a Chilean author, who drew inspiration from her personal story. It tells the tale of a family of wolves who find out their father is an assassin.
It's a situation that's unspoken in our society, that we don't talk about, but that's recently emerged from the shadows.
After the event, a young woman introduces herself to Analia. She says she's the granddaughter of a war criminal.
She's also the granddaughter of an executioner.
Yes, that's why. I heard her speak.
So you stayed.
I have many memories of my grandfather. It's very powerful.
It's great that you came out to see us. Don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
Analia's organization has more than 120 members across the country. But that number seems small, considering more than 1,000 Argentinians were found guilty of crimes against humanity. That's why public events like this one are crucial for breaking the still lingering taboo. Analia also wrote her own book about her relationship with her father, torturer of the regime.
We believe that through our personal stories, we can encourage others to speak out. Very often, unintentionally, we submit to this code of silence because we don't want to cut ties with our family. But seeing that others have managed to do it, that opens up new possibilities and ways of thinking.
In rejecting her family legacy, Analia became a disobedient child. She named her organization Historias Desobedientes, or Disobedient Stories.
This disobedience occurs first with regards to family loyalty, that sense of duty that puts us in a position where we must give our unwavering support to our criminal fathers, and we're rejecting that.
Her collective, the first of its kind in the world, was founded 6 years ago. At the time, a controversial law passed in Argentina, reducing prison sentences for the regime's executioners. Analia and a handful of others protested, identifying themselves for the first time as children of war criminals.
It was striking to see people's reactions when they looked at our sign. These two men approached us to tell us to be careful, that we made a mistake on the sign and that someone might think that we're the children of war criminals. They were confused because it's something that's difficult to comprehend.
Once or twice a month, members of the organization meet up on a video call to talk about the collective's future.
We're thinking about making a video.
Oh, that would be great.
A quick 2-minute thing that can serve as an introduction and that we can use on social media.
Becoming part of a group helped these Argentinians emerge from their solitude. That's the case for Leonardo Miranda, who's been a member of Historias Desobedientes for 4 years. We traveled more than 1,000 kilometers to meet him in the city of Mendoza, northeast Argentina. He asked to meet at Departamento 2 de Informaciones, a former torture center. It was run by Leonardo's father during the dictatorship. At least 200 people were held prisoner here.
Today it's become a memorial site. It's a very dismal place that gives off this energy that's very hard to handle.
Leonardo spent 42 years of his life completely in the dark about what happened, until his father was arrested and tried for crimes against humanity in 2012.
I went to nearly every hearing during the trial. I listened to all the testimonies and hoped that at some point he would be exonerated, that the documents, the testimonies, would prove that he had nothing to do with the whole process of disappearances, detention, homicide. But the exact opposite happened. It confirmed that there was no way he wasn't directly responsible for what happened.
Leonardo was there when his father was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence he supports, despite pressure from his family.
I was very misunderstood by my brothers and the other members of my family who can't accept that I would take the side of human rights and not that of my father. It was a betrayal to them.
To help him carry on, Leonardo began seeing a psychologist 9 years ago. Even today, he says it's the only way he was able to stay afloat.
When the trial began, I started feeling like I was running out of oxygen. My very life was at stake, because what was being threatened was my father, my story, my family.
His battle was to save his father. He couldn't comprehend how his passionate, happy father, with his music, his guitar, his friends, could have anything to do with this other person he was learning about.
Leonardo remains torn between two images of his father, the executioner and the kind man who raised him. Every month he still visits his father. The former soldier is serving his sentence at home, a few kilometers away.
Even today, when I'm 10 blocks away from my father's house, I still ask myself, will I go say hello to him or will I not? This contradiction is always present, and I'm certain it will continue until my father's death.
Analia chose a different path to make peace with her traumatic past. She began to meet with survivors of the dictatorship and families of victims. That's how Matias entered her life.
How are you, Matias? Come give me a hug. It's so good to see you, so good to be here.
The two of them met for the first time years ago at a conference. Back then, they had no idea the connection they shared.
I had no idea your parents disappeared in the Atletico clandestine center. And you had no idea that my father was sentenced for crimes he committed in Atletico. We really didn't expect that.
It was powerful. She wasn't just the daughter of some criminal. She was the daughter of one of those responsible for the repressive circuit my mother and father passed through.
In spite of this huge chasm, Analia and Matias managed to forge a strong bond of friendship.
For me, this encounter was a victory and a challenge. A victory because Analia didn't become what her father would have wanted her to become. And also a challenge because the moment we met, I didn't know much about Analia. I needed to have faith.
For us, the children of criminals, these encounters give us huge relief. I think it's very healthy, very healing for society.
Even now, Matias doesn't know where his parents' bodies are buried. His pain only worsened when years later he learned his mother was pregnant at the time, and that he might have a little brother or sister somewhere out there. This year, Argentina is celebrating 40 years of democracy, and the scars of the past are still visible across the country, even on stage. Nicolás Ruarte is a theater director with 33 years' experience. His two grandfathers actively participated in the dictatorship. He decided to write a play to share his story and his quest for the truth.
This is one of the scenes that touches me the most. I wrote all the words because it's a synthesis of different moments in my life, conversations with my grandfather, his point of view on the truth and the dictatorship. My grandfather and a large majority of soldiers never repented, and this tango shows that, these guys who are proud of what they did.
His choice to speak out through art is a way to lighten the burden of his family legacy. But it's also a way to keep the dictatorship's ideology from making a comeback.
Silence benefits those in power, the military, and the best thing we can do is to talk about these things, continue to bring up the past, and tell these stories from as many points of view as possible.
Abroad, these children and grandchildren of war criminals have inspired others with similar stories, in other countries that have also known dictatorship. In South America or Europe, other descendants of executioners have also begun to defy this code of silence.
Eleanor Vanel with Onka Ula revisiting the children of Argentina's military dictatorship for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition.